Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavi'is, Perek Aleph, Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Gimel. We left off on Daf Beis, Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. And let's quickly review where we are at. Our Mishnah here in Masechta Shavi'is defined a stay Ilan in the context of the Isur Shnei Perakim that differentiates between a stay Lavan that we didn't learn about yet inside versus a stay Ilan. In other words, the way we are learning, on top of the understanding of the time that there is an Isur Doiraisa called Toisefa Shviz. And the example that we are using is the example of plowing, that one may not plow biblically, Midoiraisa, 30 days before the 7th year. On top of that, the Chachamim, until it was abolished or until it was the condition was undone, added to that, and they said that if you have an orchard, a stay Ilan, you already may not plow from Shavuos. If you have a grain field, then you may not plow from Pesach. So how do you define a orchard? L'may nafkamina. If it's not an orchard, then it will be in the category of a grain field, and the prohibition of plowing will begin even earlier. So our Mishnah said that in an area of a Beisa, which is 2,500 square amas, if you have 3 trees in a Beisa, and the trees give off a minimum amount of weight, right? The weight of 60 mana of pressed figs. And as we mentioned, to repeat, we're not speaking only about fig trees. We are saying that no matter what tree you have, we have to estimate that if this would have been a fig tree, conforming the length of the branches, etc., it would give this minimum amount of weight, then the entire Beisa is considered a stay Ilan. Now, there's a lot that will be clarified today. It's amazing that many of us are coming off Masechtas Kalayim, and we had not the same, but very similar discussions when it came to a vineyard. How do you define a vineyard? How much does a vineyard extend to? When we speak about the 3 trees, we still have to clarify how are they configured in this Beisa. And we quoted the Rash, as we're going to quote today the Rambam, that they are very liberal in the way they are configured. There is one limitation that we do insist, is that if these 3 trees don't even have 4 amas in between one the other, in other words, a person who wants to plow that area cannot pass between the trees with his oxen and plowing implements, then we won't consider this to be 3 trees in a Beisa, because we're going to presume that the balabas at some point, sooner than later, will remove one of the trees, because no one likes to have a field in which you can't properly travel through with your plowing instruments. We're going to come back to that today. So that was what we learned here. Now, the Gemara began by, it's amazing how bekitzed it is. Normally, the Gemara would quote a Mishnah, and then you would quote certain statements that the Amoraim made on the Mishnah. The Gemara doesn't even quote the Mishnah. It expects us to understand what we're talking about. And we are referring to a Mishnah in Bava Basra. The topic over there is when someone sells trees, no mention of land was made at all. So there's a Mishnah that says that if 3 or more, like here, 3 or more, if 3 trees were sold, then it's not only that the buyer bought the 3 trees, avada, with whatever kinyan they made, but they also bought the land in between the trees. And outside the trees, kimaloi oire vesaloi, this is an expression that we also have over here, which is, like we mentioned, 2 amas around that area. So you get a lot more than the 3 actual trees. So that is a statement in the Mishnah. On that, we have 2 topics. We have 2 statements of Amoraim. One we learned yesterday. It's B'Shem Shmuel and B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan. Again, not to confuse it with the second statement, we're just going to quote the half B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, that the 3 trees in Bava Basra have to have a minimum and a maximum configuration. The maximum is that if they go beyond 15.81 amas, then the rule of the Mishnah in Bava Basra does not apply. The buyer bought the trees with zero land, only the tree. And on the other hand, if they are within, close to each other, less than 4 amas, then also the rule of the Mishnah that you also bought the land in between and around does not apply. That is the statement b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. We already mentioned, again, we're going to today quote the Rambam, that Rabbi Yochanan's limitation of minimum, maximum, only in part applies over here. There is no maximum. We will allow for the shvi'is in 3 trees to be further away than the 15.81 amas. We will allow that, but we will not allow for them to be less than 4 amas one to the other. And the Gemara explicitly, Bechlal, doesn't question whether Rabbi Yochanan's statement applies here or not. That's where we're up to. We're going to take off where we're going to see that over there's another machloikas. Then again, the Mishnah there by the sale between Rav and Shmuel. We'll see what that is. And the discussion that we'll have here in Shavias is another machloikas Amoraim, whether the argument of Rav and Shmuel will be also applied over here, or even though they argue there, Lukula Alma here, they will not argue as we will see this unfolding. Now, what will become clear when we will learn our sugya today is that we're going to get a much better understanding as to what's the logic of 3 trees in a Beisah. Why will it define the entire Beisah as an orchard? Some of it will be a loy plug, because at the end of the day, we don't care that much about the configuration. But one big chap that we'll all get at the end is that in part, the roots of trees, we find this over here. We find this also in the laws of damages, as we'll see. The roots of trees, how long they are in actuality, I don't know. But the first 25 amas under the ground that they extend, not to one side, to one side and to the other side, that's a total of 50. There are significant roots that take nourishment from the ground. So there's a logic, a Beisah is a 50 by 50. That's what we said, 50 by 50 amas makes 2,500 square amas. There is something about even a tree extending out that much. So when you have 3 trees, there's some logic to that. As we'll see more details, that is how we get to the number of a Beisah. We will also explain more details that if you don't have an orchard, so even if you have many trees, but they are spread out way more than in the Beisah, or you can have 3 trees in a Beisah, but they're not producing the 60 mana weight of figs had they been producing figs. So it doesn't have a din of an orchard, but Chavra, don't forget, it doesn't mean that you may never plow around it already from Pesach. We did say, and we'll repeat that even if you don't classify the entire area as a Beis Ilan, the land under the branches of any tree and the area around any tree, Kimaloi Oida Vasaloi, which means 2 amas, there you will be allowed to plow until Shavuos, regardless. And the Gemara will also discuss some more applications, some more definitions regarding the individual tree case, which also gives the heted for a very small area up until Shavuos. I think that's a very good chazara and intro of Daf Gimel. And now let's go inside. Again, we are on Daf Beis Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. After we spoke out the qualification of B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan in the Mishnah in Bava Basra, now we quote a machloikas that we have in Bava Basra. Rav says that even though he's not arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, he is saying that in order for a person who's selling 3 trees, who made no mention of land, for it to automatically also include the land under the trees and in between the trees and even extending outside, that's only if the configuration of the trees is like a triangular. That's ba'asuyim chatsuva. That's what he says. And the logic behind that, as we have in the Rishonim, in Masechtas Bava Basra, is that when you have a format of a triangular, think about it. It makes it so difficult for you to plow in between the trees. Even though Vlad, you have the 4 amas. In other words, it's not a row. When you have rows, you take a plow and you go, like we learned by Kalayim. Here you have a triangular. And because of the difficulty of plowing, it makes more sense that the owner will not also plant crops in that area, because to plant crops, you have to plow. Makes it very difficult to plow. I forgot the word that Dana used yesterday. When you plant crops in an orchard.
Cover crop.
Cover crop. And remember, Chevra, a cover crop is mamish allowed when you have trees. The only exception is a vine. That's what we learned in the previous Masechta. So in other words, when you configure it in a way where you make the plowing difficult for you to plant a cover crop, that's why, I know we're not talking about the dinim of Shviz, but that is where you say the land is for the trees. So even though he only sold the trees, he's not going to use the land for himself. He sold the land. That's Rav's logic. And Shmuel disagrees with him. Shmuel says, of course, if it wasn't a triangular, but even ba'asuyim shura, even if the trees form a regular line, so the plowing in that area adjacent to the trees is very easy. Nevertheless, that's the rule of the Mishnah. The rule of the Mishnah is that if you have 3 trees, and in Bava Basra, they must be spaced with a certain equanimity. In other words, as we had yesterday in the picture, there we say that when trees are spaced on land in such a way, those trees include the land with them. That's the machlokes we have over there. And again, the Gemara doesn't make a mention here yet about whether Rabbi Yochanan's limitations, max minimum, apply here, even though we'll see other statements in the Gemara later. But we're skipping Rabbi Yochanan, and we're only focusing now on Rav and Shmuel. Now bring it back over here. Our Mishnah says to have a steilan, you have to have 3 trees that have a certain amount of produce in a besa. Will we apply the machlekes of Rav and Shmuel here or not? In other words, Shmuel, I don't care if it's in a straight line. But the question is, Amar Rabbi Yosi, that over there, we're not talking about Shmuel, we're talking mainly about Rav. Rav is the one that limits the ruling in Bava Basra. Taman is Amart. There is where Rav made a statement. Okay? There, if it's not in a triangular, then it's not. The land is not included. But over here, once even l'Rav, even if the 3 trees that our Mishnah spoke about are not formatted in a triangular, even if they are in a straight line, nevertheless, Rav will agree that as long as those 3 trees are inside a Beisa and they give, like the Mishnah says, Ru'uyam lasis kikar develo shel shishim manabi talki, Rav will hold that entire Beisa will be classified as a Beis Ilan, and therefore we're more lenient. Yeah, you're not allowed to plow. I get that. But you don't have to begin with the Isur from Pesach. You get to plow it all the way until Shavuos. That is the end of Dav Beis Amud Beis. Whoever's joining us right now, Dav Gimel Amud Aleph, all the way in the top. Rabbi Yoina argues. Rabbi Yoina is more machmir than Rabbi Yosi. He says, no, listen, Shmuel is Shmuel. Shmuel is lenient everywhere. But we're talking about Rav. Amar Rabbi Yoina, afilu hacha is amart. Even over here, Rav will hold that if the trees are close to each other, I want to define, Chevra, what's kroivim? Close to each other means you have exactly the 4 amas. If they are close to each other and they are in a straight line, now, if they're far away from each other, even though the Gemara doesn't elaborate, if they're farther away from each other, it makes more sense that they should take up the whole Beisa. Don't forget, Beisa, if you're only measuring one side, is 50 amas, 50 by 50. So now how far spread out he doesn't mention. But he says if they're close to each other. Now we know less than 4 amas is nishgut. But if they have the minimum, it's 4 amas. So think about it. How much space does these trees occupy? Really, 8 amas and a bit. There's only 3 trees. If in between there's 4 amas, 8 and 8 are mitabissal. So if you have 8 amas and not they're in a straight line, to say that the whole Beisa becomes a steilan, also Rav will say no. Now, how does it help that it's in a triangular? It has to do with the roots. See, there's not that many words here.
About the roots in the intro, we're going to come to it. If it's 25 almost in each direction,
then you only need 1.
each one, then 1.
We'll get to that. So we add that in there. It's going to help make some more logic to it. But the words of Rabbi Yoina is that if the trees are spaced with only the minimum for Amas, Rav will also say here in Masechta Shvius that if they're not formatted in a triangular, then you cannot say you can plow the whole base all the way up until you won't say that. But if they are but Rav will also insist that if it's bikroivim, you have to have the format of a triangle. The Gemara will refute the sheet of Rabbi Yoinam by the following. Now we're up to Daf Gimel in our pagination. On Daf Hey, or when we used to go the old days, Mishnah Daled, the Mishnah elaborates more about it. And the fact that the Mishnah, who's giving more qualifications to the rule of 3 trees, the fact that the Mishnah doesn't say this, it's too much to allow Rav's qualification to come into place. You see, in Bava Basra, there's only one little statement by the Tanoim. It's not uncommon for the Tanoim to be very, very bekitzer. So if the Tana makes a very little rule, he just mentions the very vague rule. For Amiroim to add many qualifications, whoever learns Gemara, you get used to it. You wonder, why didn't the Mishnah say it? You have a good kasha. But once the Tanoim themselves begin to give a lot of qualifications, but they don't give this, here the Gemara is arguing, is a raya that this is not needed. Let's read it inside. Amalei Rav Mana is challenging Rabbi Yoina. Rav Mana is siding with Rabbi Yosi. The im bikroivim. If indeed you're saying that when the 3 trees are spaced with the minimum 4 amas between, it has to be a triangular for you to have the din of a beisah, but then it doesn't go. Why not? Because for Hatanina, and we're going to learn, not in the next Mishnah, guys, we're up to halacha beis. We're going all the way to halacha dalet, or to daf hey. The Mishnah explains more details of, like we mentioned, of the kroivim. And even though the Gemara never asked whether Rabbi Yochanan's rules by Bava Basra apply over here, you're gonna see how we're gonna address it. And the Mishnah will say that when do we say that 3 trees in a beisah qualifies the whole beisah sedei ilan only if kedei sheyia habakar over bekelev, only if the minimum space that you left between the trees will allow you for the oxen and the kelev, which means the plowing implements, to pass in between the trees. And so what's the raya? What's the kasha? What's the fact that the Mishnah is already telling you, it has to be that close and not closer. That close and not closer. Rav Mana's logic is, the Mishnah also should have said, it has to be formatted in a triangular. It's if the Mishnah makes no mention of anything, then it's easier to say the Tana gave you the klal and Torah Shabal Peh, and everyone should remember. It's just a reminder. They know it by heart. But the moment the Tana is already giving you that detail, he's telling you it can't be closer than 4 amas, he should have said it can't be in a line. It has to be in a triangular. The fact that the Mishnah doesn't say that detail is that detail is not necessary, which means that, going back, that the triangular is only needed by a sale. I see a big logic to that because of the roots. Because by a sale, it has nothing to do with the roots. The sale fakert, it's a big chiddush in Bava Basra to say that a man or woman is selling a tree, and automatically it means the land. You try that. I know from the perspective of the buyer, you want to get more for less money. But let's think that you're the seller. You sell something, you only sold what you sold. You don't sell what you didn't sell. The guy only spoke about trees. So it's a big chiddush to say that from the trees, it means land. There you can add, it has to be, if triangular, like we said, it's so difficult to plow in the middle, so the owner won't put overcrop. He won't put overcrop, so the land is only servicing the trees. So it's bottled to the trees. There's a lot of logic here. Has nothing to do with here. I know because I mentioned about the roots, and like Vlad pointed out well, that actually you can make an argument that if it's about the roots, that maybe even 1 tree is enough. I know that. Well, let's read it inside. Okay.
Is 4 amos enough for a team of cattle to go?
Yes, we learned the same thing in Kalaim. I know we had the same thing over there. Yeah. That was why by Kalaim, the 2 rows, remember the 2 rows have to have 4 amos, maximum 8. Remember, if it's 8, or if it's a kedem of 3 rows or more, the Mishnah allowed you even 16. Same idea. And actually, when we went and Kevan took us, or Gavriel took us over here to the kedem, we learned about the whole chachma that this guy was explaining, is that people want to make the most use of the land. So for that, you would plant it closer and closer. And don't forget that the implements that they use today is not oxen. And yet they leave a certain space in between the rows. And he explained that if you make it even closer, they want to get a certain amount of pounds of grapes from an area.
It's a yield.
They want a yield, and it affects the yield, or it affects the quality of the yields because everything is taking nourishment out of the ground. There's almost that much that you can take out. The rabbi is fundraising too much money from the chevres, and nicht da so viel Geld. You schlep. V'yikhuli. Okay. Also, Chamei says the Gemara. Here's the problem. Like Tashima, come, Ase, Chamei gebakuk. The shosh habakar over bekelov. Yes, I get it. You left the 4 ames, okay? But Hashiroshim Mahalchim min Atzad. The Gemara is saying that it's about the roots. We're speaking about over here. And the roots go to the sides of the trees. And yes, guys, we're going to see not only here that there is a concept that the roots will go to each side 25 amas. What? The roots only go to the sides, Vlad, when you have when the oxen can go on top, and if you plant the trees close to each other, the roots are smaller. The roots go to the sides regardless how close or how far the trees are. So the Gemara is saying, so l'chayra, who cares how close they are? The Gemara doesn't continue. By the way, we're for those of us, this is our 5th Masechta. Many times, in the Bavli, you would say teku. In the Bavli, the Gemara would tell you, hey, we had a problem that we have no answer to. Here, it appears like the Gemara doesn't have an answer to. I don't think the Gemara means not to have an answer to it. Why not? Because when I was learning this, I came to the same question Vlad was asking. Why not 1 tree? There is a din of 3 trees. 3 trees, it goes from a single to an orchard. Like from on a minyan, so a minyan, you need to have 10. Why not? There's a rule. By a minyan, you need to have 10. By an orchard, you have to have a minimum amount. And if, you have to have 3. Let's go, I'll give it. We learned this in Kalayim. When you cannot plow in between the trees, it was not uncommon for people to begin the process of growing trees, saplings together. And once they begin to grow, you remove them to give each one the right space that they need, or to give the possibility of plowing in between. You're right, the Gemara is saying. The concept of the roots won't be affected. It's almost as if the Gemara is saying it. But you have to have 3 trees. When you plant trees so close together that you can't even plow with an oxen or bekelev in between it, I think, l'cho'ora, you will uproot those trees, or you will uproot at least 1 tree. So you're not going to have 3 trees, and you have to have 3 trees. The 50 amas has to do really even with 1 tree. But there's another thing. You have to have a minimum of 3 trees. Okay, and let's leave it at that, or you can just say the Gemara is asking a question and the Gemara has no answer. Now let's come back. So Rabbi Yochanan over there in Bava Basra mentioned about how they should be configured. First of all, we made it clear from the picture that we showed, whether it's boxes, whether it's circles, that in Bava Basra, they have to be equidistant. Now, do they have to be equidistant over here? That's basically what the Gemara is going to be discussing, and we're going to have a machlokes amoraim. And getting familiar with the lashonos, Rabbi Eliezer, I know the word sha'al means he asked. Here, it doesn't mean he asked, he made a statement. And what's a statement? And then if you can put up the picture, whoever has an art school should take a look at 3A2. This picture is gavaldik. He's asserting that we want for the 3 trees to be equidistant from each other. That's the proper stay elon. And that would mean if you have an area of 50 by 50, and you place them in the center, so it's not so much about equidistant, it's more about the center, which would mean if you plant them equidistant, Vlad, if you take a look at the picture, you have to take 50 amas. You only have 3 trees. So in between the trees, you'll have 16 amma. That's one way of placing it. But the key, in my understanding, is that from the other side, you're planting the tree not the way Rav says. You don't need a triangular. They can be planted in a row. So you're going to have on each side 25 amas. The truth is, I know it's not 25 amas because the tree itself takes up space, but the Gemara wants to point out is that we want for there to be 25 amas from each side of the tree. So he is insisting that the 50 amas has to be placing the tree in the center. Now that we mentioned roots. Rabbi Eliezer Shal either asked or he stated that mizulazu sesh esrei, that we can tolerate even 16 in between them. But what we need, uletzad esrim v'chamesh. Basically, what he's saying is that you have to place the trees in the center of the Beisah. Like, how do you measure the Beisah? You measure it conforming the trees. Now, what would happen if you have a fenced-in area? So you have a very balabatisha definition when you have a Beisah, or if you only own a Beisah, this is my property. What would happen if you were to plant the 3 trees on one side, according to Rabbi Eliezer? You're not going to have the whole Beisah classified. You will not have. The most you can have is 25 amas, because it has to do with the roots. So holds Rabbi Eliezer. The row is giving you 25 on each side. Abed, however, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak Boyi, he asserted the way I understand. I know he wrote a similar. It's not a similar. He argues that no, that once Chachamim gave you the din of a 3 trees to a Beisah, I do not care where the 3 trees are centered. That if you have a person, let's say, that has a Beisah, and they have a fence marking their property, so you see the Beisah, and even if the 3 trees are positioned bitzad hagoder on the side, we just said that the roots only go to each side 25 amas, not more. But now that you have the 3 trees and you have a Beisah, let me use the words loy plug, chorshin kol Beisah b'shvilan. We're going to see in a moment that we don't apply loy plug so liberally over here, but here, according to Rav Shmuel, but Rabbi Yitzchak, we do. I'm learning the Gemara that as clearly, by the way, the Marafuldo also says that the word sha'al and the word boyi is not a boya, it's not a shayla, it's a statement. And they are arguing. Rabbi Elazar puts it in the middle. Now, I don't understand why we need to have the 16 am. I didn't understand that. We just learned Befedish in the Mishnah that all you need is that it should not be closer than 4 amas. But l'chayda, that would imply that it can be even more than 16 amas. I remembered now, guys, where did we have the 16? In Masechtas Kalayim. Again, when you have a 3 row, here you have 3 trees. Is it related or not related? I do not know.
It doesn't add up in this picture unless we, in one direction, will give width to the star.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. No, what Vlad is pointing out, very good. In Kalayim, we also made mention in the more details. Remember whether the vine is within, whether it's without. That was the Rab Zaida over there. No, here we're not. It's a 50 total. The 50 total means that you actually get a little bit less than 25 amas on each side because you are measuring from the middle of the tree. I don't have a problem with that. That's a general. We can generalize. But the point, the way I understand is that maybe he's giving a maximum. Maybe he's not allowing it for it to be more than 16.
Can you take a step back? This whole argument as to whether it is considered an orchard or not.
Yep.
What's the nafkamina?
Nafkamina is like this, Danny, that if a side of the area under the branches and kimaloi oira v'saloi around each tree, that no matter what, you are allowed to plow all the way up until Shavuos. During the time of Isur Shnei Perakim, that was abolished by Beis Din of Rabbi Gamliel. During the time that there was an Isur, if it's a Stei Ilan, then the Isur of Tosefah Shvis Midrabanan begins Shavuos. Meaning, prior to Shavuos, you can plow the whole base up. If it's not a Stei Ilan, Danny, then it's called a Stei Lavan, and the Isur Midrabanan then already began from Pesach. That's the question. Could you plow that area bein Pesach Latzeres or not? Now, I want to read.
So in theory, if this Beisah was like ungestupt with trees, they were very close to each other. It was like packed, right?
And you can only plow.
That would not be considered an orchard.
Very good.
That would somehow be considered
it's not so unusual because then we say, no, the Chachamim had a rule of 3 trees. When people plant 2 packed, they will remove those trees. If you're removing those trees, then you can't say that the area is designated as an orchard. The area is designated for nothing. It's a temporary holding place. It's like all of the
I'm glad that
Israelis
makes
that moved
sense,
to
Steve.
LA. They're going back to Israel, like Yakir. They just to make a few dollars. Let me read the Rambam. Rambam Hilchos Shmita v'Yovel, like we mentioned. First of all, the Seder of the Rambam. And for those of us who are learning 3 prakim a day, a big mazel tov today. Today's the first day of Chodesh Adar. Tavshin Pehei. We're finishing the Rambam. The Rambam writes, Shmita v'Yovel, Perek Shlishi Halacha Beis. Listen to this. Ezeu hu stei ha'ilon. Okay. That and the Rambam writes in Halacha Aleph, not about the Rambam writes that Bisman Habayis, that's the way he learns. L'choyre, that would mean that's going to go back to the way that's going to go back, because the Rambam holds that the 30 days Tosefes, like Rabbi Yishmael, is Allah Moshe Sinai. We cannot take away Allah Moshe Sinai. But what we do is that Allah Moshe Sinai, if the Sefer Shvi is 30 days, is Bisman Shabeis HaMikdash Chaim. Which means when the third Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt, these dinim will be negeah. That's why the Rambam is writing it. What will be the dinim? Stay Elon, the Isser goes even back until Shavuos. Stay Lavan, all the way back until Pesach. So what's a stay Elon? I'm reading the Rambam. Kol shloisha Ilonos lebeisa. Echad Elon Sirak. Wow. The Echad Elon Machol. Okay. Even, in other words, we have to see if it would have been a fig tree, the Rambam writes it befedish. Even if the 3 trees belong to 3 different people. Roya noisan ki ilu hein te'enim, as if they were to be fig trees. Imru uyim lasois kikar devela shal shisha manem, and that means the Rambam clearly that if all 3 together give you that weight, not every tree, then choreshin kol beisa b'shvilan, and he gives one condition of Rabbi Yechanan, one half of Rabbi Yechanan. For who sheyia rachik ben kol echad v'yachad, it's the Mishnah. Kedei sheyia habakar yachal la'avol b'kelov. Now, if it's less than 3 to the besa, or you have 3, but you don't have this amount, so then he ein chorshen lahem elot sarchan. You can always plow for that tree until Shavuos, but we're under the tree. And around it only maloi ha'oida v'salei chutzaloi. Mamash, what we're learning. Gavaldik. Okay. Now let's go back. Let's go back in the Gemara. So now we are turning to Daf Gimel Amid Beis. Good, we have time. Says the Gemara, Omer Rabbi Yosi, based on the above, based on Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, that you can really have the 3 trees to the side. And why are you measuring it only one-sided? Because of a fence. So he says, I have a good answer for you. If you own a lot of land and you happen to have 3 trees, arangahak somewhere in the middle, you know what you should do, Vlad? Put the fence for a moment, I don't know for how long, where the trees are all the way to the right of the fence. So now you have the whole Beisa from one side. Then you move the fence to the opposite side. And not only do you go right, left, go up and down, and you have 4 times the amount. Not exactly, there's some overlap. That's what he's saying. Let me tell you how I can extend it. That Talmud the Vils, Niten lahem arba saw, not 1 beisa, 4 beisa, which is sa'a mikan, usa'a mikan, sa'a mikan, usa'a mikan, with some overlap. Now, how long do you have to leave the fence? You have to say l'shem yichud. I have no idea how this works, but that's how it works. Now let's go right. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah boy. Again, this boy, like the Marafulda says, you see clearly, he's not asking. He's asserting, he's making a statement. I want you to know when people ask a question, their question is based on a premise. That's a statement. Every question is based on something. Here, they're just lachatchila. Let me ask you something. Yeah, most people are not asking. They're making a statement. Let me ask you, do you care for me? And what are you saying? You're not asking. You're saying you don't. You have to know how Yerushalmi speak. Yakir will explain you more. We said that if you don't have a orchard, but you have 1 tree, we just learned it in the Rambam, which is our dinim, then under the branch, yeah, what happens if you have 1 branch that goes for line vida gullus? Now, what branch is so long? He gives an example. You have a vine. You have a vine that never stopped growing. We went to the vineyard. If they don't prune it, the vines never stop growing. So even if you only have 1 vine, you know what? if the vine is mudla, if it's supported by a trellis, and it goes for how far? 2 sa'in. Goes a mile. Yeah. So then at chodesh karka tachtel, then you can plow the land under the vine. And the karka shechutzala maloi oida v'sali chutzaloi. And let me add another detail. You can argue why underneath it. Come on, guys. I'll tell you something. Also, what we saw from Olam Hazagashmi in that bikur that we made to the Kedem, and that is that when we told the goy that we learned in Menachos that for the Beis Hamikdash, which we have to bring the best wines, we have to bring it not from trellised vineyards, but it's called from ragliois. I forgot the word.
I think it was called head trains.
Head frame. Danny remembers so good.
Head trains.
Anyways, it's the ones that are laying on the ground. He actually said, he was explaining, because today you make trellises with metal little strings. It's much easier to make it. So there's a height. And the lower to the ground, the better the grapes are. Why? Because somehow it gets some nourishment from the ground underneath it. If it would get no nourishment from the ground underneath it, who cares how high, how low it is? This fits. So if you have this geffen mudla, you can plow the land underneath it the whole 2 sa, and outside either side of the vine, kimaloi oida v'sali, which is 2 amos, 4 amos is a nice amount. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara weiter, during the time that we had Isur Shnei Perakim Rishayim, again, we already know, we began by learning that the beginning of Daf Aleph Amid Beis, is that nowadays, meaning when the Yerushalmi was written, in the Holy Land, they would plow all the way up until Shavuos, because they abolished it. But when there was Isur Shnei Perakim, now he's asking the following questions. What is going to happen if you have trees on a mountainside? Let's use the word slope. All back, guys, we're all going back to the 25 amos of the roots. So just put in your brain, tracht, if I have an inclined land and I put a tree on it, let's say the roots go 25 amos. They're not going up the slope. They're going straight horizontally in the ground. It's not going to go to the end of the 25 amos. Will you give the 25 amos even on a slope? So we begin this discussion by saying that when you have 2 rows of trees, you have to add all this. See, the Gemara was very bekatzer. You have 2 rows of trees. Every row is of 3. One is towards the top of the mountainside slope. One is towards the bottom. How much space do you have in between the rows? A whole beisah. Now, if you don't have a fence, we l'kula alma. How do you measure the beisah if you don't have a fence? Only half to each side. Only half. Only 25 here, 25 there. Everyone agree if you don't have a fence. Here you don't have a fence. But if you have 3 trees, Vlad, and 3 trees, if the one to my left goes 25 amas, half beisah, and the one to the right goes, so then it will take up the whole space. If it's on a flat land, it's a given. Yeah, and a chanami. Here it's on a slope. In other words, we want to know, now I'll tell you another detail. That the roots go down, the Gemara takes it as a given, as a botanical given, that when you're looking at the trees that are higher, and you want to know how to measure from the trees lower, there we say, vadai, the roots will go even more than 25 amas, but the rule is 25 amas. But the question is, do the 3 trees in the bottom, which normally should give you a base saw, which is half and half, will it give you 25 amas up? Let's read it inside. So again, the Gemara is giving you we have 2 rows of trees, and the trees are properly spaced apart. You don't have any fences. Each row of trees takes up a beisah by having the trees in the center, which means from each side you only have, let's go to amas, 25 amas. You have 50 amas in between the 2 rows. So the Gemara makes a statement, b'shem no one, as a statement that elu milmailon, the 3 trees above, they give you the half of Beisah. They give you the 25 amas milmatan. The elu milmatan, that will be the bechidish, chorshen boy milmailon. That's gavaldik. And what's the chiddush that he's saying over here? Chiddush that he's saying is that the roots, like I mentioned, that are going from up to down will go more than 25 amas. The roots of the trees of the bottom will go less than 25 amas. So the chiddush of the Gemara is that once we have the rule of 3 trees to every base saw, and unless the fence, which I think it might even be a machloikas, but other than that, you put the trees in the center and you give each side 25 amas, we give it no matter what. We give it no matter what. So the ones from above, even though the roots might be going more than 25 amas, you only give 25 amas. The trees that are in the bottom, that you want to go upwards 25 amas, even though the roots don't go all the way up there, you give it a 25 amas. So now the base saw in between is fully covered and you can plow it all the way up until Shavuos. It's not the Metzias. Nicha elo mil mailon, like I mentioned, the trees that are planted on a slope, that the roots that are going down will cover 25 amas, really plus. That's good, fits. Nichu elo mil mailon chorshen boy mil maton. The picture to me is the only picture that I don't see how the picture gave any added help. But the elo mil maton. But if you need to have 25 amas because of the trees that are planted in the lower part of the slope, and you're going up, you are based on it giving yourselves 25 amas. No, it doesn't extend that far. That's the problem. So the Gemara says, well, I find elsewhere, let me use the words loiplug. Where do we find it elsewhere? Now we're going to halachis in a Mishnah in Bava Basra. Again, a different Mishnah in Bava Basra. There, if you remember in the beginning, we're speaking about what one person cannot do on their property, even though it's on their property, because it will eventually do damage to the neighbor's property. And there's a lot of chiddush here, because sometimes we say when it comes to damages, that if it's not direct, right? Garmi, Rav Meir says you're chayiv. Grama, no, but there's a lot of rules. So what happens if you have a pit in your property? You have a pit in your property. And I want to plant a tree in my property. So we learn in a Mishnah that I have to distance my tree from your pit 25 amas. This is Nakuda. Why? Because since the roots travel 25 amas, the main root, and my roots are going to break the walls of your pit, I can't do it. Let's read it inside. We learn over there that marchikon esoilan min haboid, we're speaking about neighbors, and I cannot say, well, I'm planting in my property. Esrim v'chamish amas. That is a Mishnah. Mishnah is very vague. That rule makes sense. Now we have in a Braisa the words bein mil mailan, bein mil matan. L'chu'uret means whether that even if the two properties are on a slope, whoever is on top, whoever is on bottom, and again, you would botanically, if the tree is on top of the slope, the roots will travel even more than 25 amas. Now, if you're going in the other direction, it won't go 25 amas. So the Gemara answers just like we find in Bava Basra. Let me use the words loy plug. So oy neymar. In other words, okay. The Gemara says, hold on. How do you know you're learning right pshat in the Braisa? I know it sounds like bein milmatan, bein milmatan. Maybe it doesn't mean what you think it means. Challenges the Gemara. Oy neymar efsher the Braisa in Bava Basra means bein sheho'ilan l'mailon v'habor l'matan. That works, right? Remember that? Because downwards the roots travel 25 amas really more. And maybe when the Braisa says milmatan, the Braisa meant they're both on the same level. None of it is on a slope. Maybe that's what the Braisa meant. Bein sheho'ilan or bein sheho'ilan v'habor milmatan on the same level. But maybe the Braisa that's clarifying, or the Mishnah is not speaking about a case where the boyd is milmaila and the tree is milmata. Maybe there you don't have to go all the way 25 amas away. So the Gemara says it's not true. I found another Braisa that the Fedish says that, because v'hatani ilan milmailon, clear, v'habor milmaton, that way works. And even if the tree is under in the slope, bottom in the slope, and the boyd is milmailon, you have the rule of 25 amas. We call that like plug. In other words, nicha. So again, nicha makes sense. Ilan milmailon v'habor milmaton, but ilan milmaton v'habor milmailon, the same kasha you have over here, I have over there. So therefore, just like you find there lay plug, I say here lay plug. And the Gemara says you can't compare one case to the other. I know it's mamash getting late, and I'll tell you the big difference. The difference is we had this also in Kalayim. That it's not just I'm concerned that the roots are going to break the walls of the pit. When you have a slope and you plant a tree, the roots go horizontally. They don't go up. But what happens when roots goes horizontally is that the earth over it becomes a little bit weakened. So maybe over there we say that even if the boyd is on top and the ilin is on the bottom, you have to have 25 amas. You can't plant it closer, not because the roots will go into it. Maybe not. Maybe it's because you're weakening that whole area where the earth is becoming farshvach, and therefore the whole pit will collapse. That's a different logic. But maybe over here, what's the besa? I get you have to have 3 trees, is because the roots go in every side 25 amas, and it doesn't go that way.
So if you plant on a slope, does that mean you measure 25 hours along the slope or horizontally?
And when you measure it horizontally, it will not.
Because horizontally, if the tree's at the bottom, you measure horizontally, really distance-wise, it's farther out.
So I think it's different, Vlad. I think is that the deeper and deeper you go, the less it affects the status of the earth over it vis-a-vis plowing. Okay, that's what we're learning. I got what you're saying. So let's hop until the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Chanina, no, you cannot compare one case to the other. Maybe in Bava Basra, yeah, we say like plug, but there's a logic behind it. Not because the roots will break through the walls of the pit, because the pit is mil maila, the tree is mil mata, the roots will not touch the pit. Elama, ela shehein oisim offer toicheyach. They make the earth loose, and the hein malkin, they smite, they beat up the earth underneath the pit. That's why you have it over there. And actually, also uvda. What happens? So we are challenging this statement. So also uvda kumei Rabbi Yasi bi Rabbi Bun. And Omar and he paskined that Braisa, I know you quoted the Braisa that says loy plug, it's only Yechidihu, it's only Das Yachid, and actually the loy Somchin and Lovi, the Chachamim don't agree. And how do we know that they don't agree? Because if you have a Braisa that's written without its author, you can say, well, that's everyone, Stam. No. The Tani Allah, we learned that Rab Shimon is the one that said, Kshem she'amru milmailan kach amru milmaton, loy plug, by the pit. Why does the Braisa quote Rab Shimon? Adarabah, to tell you that the Chachamim argue with the Rashbi, and they hold that even by the pit, if I have a neighbor that's up the slope, I don't have that much of a restriction, and therefore we are arguing over here that whenever you have 3 trees and 3 trees, we are rejecting the base saw is so uniform. It's more connected to where the roots are. It's more connected to that. If it's on the flat ground, you have a base saw, and if it's not on the flat ground, let me go back to the great statement of Rab Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak Boi. Then you could, guys, it's always going to be a base saw. It's always going to be the way I understand. But the question is, will you put the trees in the center of it or not? Because the Noise Kalim are saying over here that it goes down more than 25 amps. So it's not that the Gemara is suggesting in the Maskana that you don't give it a base saw, but you don't place the trees in the middle. It's not 25. You look at the Mitzias and you conform accordingly. Gavaldik. We are up to the Mishnah.